Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith is written by Charles Soule with illustrations by Giuseppe Camuncoli. The symbiosis of Soule's rather interesting ideas with Camuncoli's visual style gave me indeed vivid impressions, as if I had watched an entire solo film about Vader. In this review, I will not retell the comic itself, so as not to deprive potential readers of the pleasure of independently reading this creation. I will cover the main, most interesting and important moments, as it seems to me. Without spoilers, of course, I will not do it, but even for those who have not read the comic and dare to watch the video to the end, I still strongly recommend reading it afterward. Honestly, I am not particularly enthusiastic about the new canon comics, but it so happened that both lines about Vader directly appealed to me, and what is characteristic, they are entirely different from each other. This comic, like nothing else, is very predisposed to searching for hidden meanings. But we will talk about this at the very end of the review, so to speak, for dessert. So, what I would like to talk about in this video, the comic literally starts immediately after this scene from Revenge of the Sith, and tells about the earliest days of the newly born Sith at the service of Emperor Palpatine. Throughout the comic, there's a line of Vader's becoming as a Sith, and this is the central theme of the entire work, and therefore the analysis of Darth Vader's image will be the core of this video. And believe me, it will be interesting. Since the events of the comic unfold shortly after the Jedi Purge, part of the comic's events is dedicated to the search for surviving light-side Force users. And here it is very interesting how Charles Soule portrays their images, especially in comparison with the images of the Imperial Inquisitors, who are former Jedi fallen to the dark side. Furthermore, one of the important themes of the comic is the search for a new sword for Darth Vader, and accordingly, the theme of the sword itself. This perhaps is where I will begin. In most cases, lightsabers in Star Wars are not only a cool, futuristic weapon emphasizing the franchise's overall image, but also an element of cinematic language through which the authors reveal the characters of the lightsaber bearers. There will be a whole series of episodes on this topic on my channel in the foreseeable future. However, among the various Force users with lightsabers, the Dark Lord Vader, in my opinion, is deprived of proper attention. In the original trilogy, he appears with a red-bladed lightsaber, indicating his allegiance to the side of evil in the main conflict of those films. And that's basically it. Let's say both of Luke's lightsabers receive much more attention. Thus, the comic fills the gap in the original trilogy and reveals the backstory of Darth Vader's lightsaber, both from the lore's perspective and in terms of symbolism. From the canon's point of view, Charles Soule apparently asks the question of where the kyber crystals for red-bladed lightsabers come from. Initially, kyber crystals are colorless, but after being chosen by a Force user, they acquire a color, most often blue or green, less frequently other colors. But either way, no light side adherent has ever ended up with a red-bladed lightsaber. This is explained by the fact that kyber crystals are initially predisposed to the light side of the Force, and it is upon this platform that the comic's author builds the lore concerning the lightsabers of the dark side adherents. It turns out that in order to give a lightsaber blade a red glow, the kyber crystal must be subdued and altered with the Force, and the sword itself, as the carrier of this crystal, must be taken by physical force. Moreover, Skywalker's lightsaber, which he lost in the duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, is not suitable, a fact that Palpatine angrily makes clear to his young apprentice, stating that the lightsaber belonged to another person. But what exactly is wrong with Skywalker's lightsaber? Let us delve a little deeper. As I mentioned earlier, the authors of Star Wars, and Lucas in particular, often paid significant attention to the connection between a Force user hero and their lightsaber. Through the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi, this idea is literally spelled out in Episode 2. And I attributed this phrase to Lucas's inability to write scripts, particularly dialogues. Well, it sounds too blunt. This phrase always seemed foolish to me due to its inappropriate context. A chase is obviously not the best time for philosophizing. This weapon is your life. On the other hand, this phrase has a metaphorical meaning, and from the height of Episode 3, takes on a different significance. I believe many are already familiar with the thematic subtext of two parallel scenes in Episode 3. The transformation of Skywalker into Darth Vader, and the birth of Padme Amidala's children. In a certain sense, the souls of the characters are already dead by this point. For Padme, the scene of mental death occurs when Anakin, the person she loves most, turns against her and her spirit. For Anakin himself, the death of his soul happens in the scene where his physical body is burning after his former friend and mentor left him to die by the rivers of Mustafa's lava. The subsequent scenes show the rebirth of the characters. For Padme, it is the childbirth scene bringing new life to her two children. For Anakin, it is the prosthetics and encasement in metal armor, resulting in the birth of Darth Vader as we know him. The fundamental difference between these parallel scenes is that Padme died physically, while Anakin did not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's return to the lightsaber and the phrase, "This weapon is your life." Obi-Wan, in the episode I already mentioned, symbolically takes Anakin Skywalker's life by seizing his lightsaber during the metaphorical death of Skywalker's soul. Consequently, there is no path back to this saber because Darth Vader is not Anakin Skywalker, at least in that metaphorical sense. This is why Palpatine unleashes all his fury on the young Sith as soon as Vader remembers his lightsaber. For Palpatine, it is crucial to impress upon his apprentice that Skywalker no longer exists. Thus, Vader needs to acquire a new foreign saber, take it by force, and transform it into a kyber crystal. Symbolic is the place where this secular ritual takes place, the planet Mustafar, the place where Anakin lost his lightsaber and where now Darth Vader creates a new one for himself. As Palpatine previously instructed him, one must pour all their pain into the kyber crystal, and then it will turn a bloody color. During his first attempt to transform the kyber crystal, Vader fails, loses consciousness, and has a vision in which he retains the original green glow of the lightsaber, appears before Palpatine to strike him down, and then confronts Obi-Wan to bow his head. I do not fully understand the meaning of this vision, so feel free to write your theories in the comments. But it is evident that the images of his current and former teachers evoke in Vader the necessary pain to transform the kyber crystal. As we see on the comics pages, at this very moment of the ritual, Vader recalls the main sources of his pain. His mother's death, the death of his beloved, his defeat in the duel with his friend, and of course the pain inflicted on him by his new mentor. The ritual concludes successfully and Vader transforms the kyber crystal, creating a lightsaber with a red glow. The scene in its meaning mirrors the climax of the duel between Skywalker and Kenobi. Just as the kyber crystal transforms through pain, Anakin also transforms through pain. This is why Mustafa's appearance in the comics narrative is not coincidental. Additionally, I will draw a certain parallel to another comic by the same author, The Rise of Kylo Ren, in whose finale Ben Solo performs the same ritual, accompanied by memories of pain, transforming his kyber crystal that gave a blue glow to his lightsaber into a kyber crystal with a red glow, as we are familiar with from the sequels. The fundamental difference between Vader's ritual and Kylo Ren's ritual is that the Sith performs it with someone else's kyber crystal, whereas Ren uses his own, which emphasizes my initial conclusion about the mental death of Skywalker, while Ben Solo does not fully transform into Kylo Ren, which is highlighted by Ren's hysterical fits in the sequels. But that is a separate topic I can't wait to delve into later. But let's return to the comic review. So Vader created his lightsaber, thereby drawing a distinct scarlet line between his past self and his present self. Now he is a Sith and the Emperor's servant, but not the only one. To seek out surviving Jedi, Palpatine establishes the Imperial Inquisitorius, consisting of Jedi traitors. This is quite ironic, as the true Jedi were labeled as traitors by the Chancellor, while the real traitors now serve the new state. Truly, the dark side is full of lies. In this comic, the Inquisitors are not just part of the lore and background heroes, they are given special attention, which is vividly manifested in their interactions with the Jedi. And initially, speaking of the Jedi, the comic features 4 Jedi who survived Order 66. 2 of them are original characters created specifically for this comic. There's a human male named Kirak Infila, who adopted a hermit lifestyle even before the Purge and did not intervene in major galactic events, and a male Iktochi named Ferran Bar, who after the Purge gathered followers and secretly helped the Mon Calamari race resist the Empire. The other 2 are familiar to us from the series and the Clone Wars. The first is the human female archivist Jocasta Nu, and the second is the male Zabrak Eth Koth. All 4 Jedi appear in the comic events at different times and under different circumstances. They all have different narrative arcs, but I noticed something common among them, which, as it seems to me, clearly expresses Charles Soule's stance on the Jedi and their esteemed order. Let us analyze. Kirak-Infil'Ar engages in a duel with Vader, underestimating his opponent and believing he has defeated him by throwing him off a cliff. Subsequently, the Jedi leaves his place of seclusion and heads to a populated city fortified by a dam. Surviving, Vader pursues Kirak and, in a fit of rage, destroys the dam structures, submerging the city along with its innocent inhabitants underwater. Thus, the overconfidence of the Jedi in their abilities led to the death of an entire city's population, whereas Kirak simply needed to check if Vader was dead. Ferren Barr belongs to the Iktochi race, characterized by their ability to foresee the future. He explicitly states this to King of Mon Cala, Li Char, voicing the prophecy about the significant role of the Mon Calamari race in the fall of the Empire. As we know from the events of Battle 1 and Episode 6, this indeed holds true. In the first case, Mon Calamari Admiral Raddus makes a decisive and victorious decision in the Battle of Scarif, and in the second, Mon Calamari Admiral Akbar leads the rebel fleet in the Battle of the Second Death Star. However, within the plot of the comic, I pay attention to the price that Jedi Ferren Barr is willing to pay for the future he saw in his visions. He provokes a full-scale and bloody invasion of Mon Cala by the Empire, as a result of which, incidentally, the Mon Calamari turned against the Empire. It seems Ferren Barr was at the origin of the future he predicted, but at what cost? At the cost of not only the people of Mon Cala, but also his own students, for all of them except one perished during the Imperial invasion of the planet. What is especially notable before each of their deaths? We are shown flashbacks from episodes in their lives when Ferren Barr gave them new hope, taking them under his tutelage. The dramatic nature of these flashbacks is enhanced by the realization that the Jedi already knew he was leading almost all his followers to certain death in the name of a brighter future. The responsibility for the death of all life as a result of the Imperial invasion of Mon Cala rests entirely on the shoulders of this Jedi. But did he think about this when he was taking those actions? The most tragic thing is that he revealed his prophecy at the moment when almost all his followers were already dead, and the people of Mon Cala had suffered significant losses. What is this if not pride when one Jedi decided the fates of dozens if not hundreds of other living beings solely on the basis that he had a vision, the catalyst of which he himself became? We'll return to this question a bit later. The next Jedi featured in the context of the comic is the Zabrak Eth Koth, who took on a wife who bore him a child. And at that very moment, the Imperial Inquisition arrives, led by none other than Darth Vader himself. It is interesting who Eth Koth became after leaving the Jedi Order, a priest. Evidently, the desire to preach and mentor is indomitable if you are a Jedi. The comic does not state this directly, but as it seems to me, it was precisely due to Eth Koth's occupation that he was found by the Imperial Inquisition. In the scene where Vader reports the results of the skirmish over the Zabrak to the Emperor, Palpatine twice mocks the former Jedi's chosen profession as a priest, and his laughter mirrors exactly my reaction to Eth Koth's choice. He couldn't simply lay low and lead an ordinary life, especially given that he found a companion and had a child who eventually ended up in the sinister Imperial clutches. Here again arises the question of responsibility, or rather, the complete irresponsibility of a Jedi, who doomed not only himself to an inglorious fate, but also his loved ones, by his choice. And the last Jedi featured in the comic is the archivist Jocasta Nu, who first appeared in the second episode. Having survived Order 66, Jocasta was concerned with the resurrection of the Jedi Order, but unlike Ferren Barr, she did not start with the search for followers, but with the creation of a knowledge base. Also, unlike all the other Jedi, in my opinion, Jocasta Nu was engaged in truly useful work and creating the future. Well, because power is in knowledge, and knowledge is in experience, which the woman consolidated on physical media. But even here, there is something that connects Jocasta with the three aforementioned Jedi. According to the comic's plot, it is revealed that the Grand Inquisitor and Jocasta Nu were acquainted in the past. The Grand Inquisitor, like the other Inquisitors, I remind you, was a Jedi and served in the Jedi Temple as a guard. The comic reveals the conflictual relationship between Jocasta and the Grand Inquisitor, which took place before the Jedi Purge. It turns out that the archivist did not allow the future traitor access to the main archive of the library, which in simpler terms means that the woman curbed the young Jedi's thirst for knowledge. Her motives in the comic are not disclosed. Perhaps it was not necessarily pride, but perfectly competent and professional behavior by the archivist. But at the same time, let's look at how the confrontation between Jocasta and the Grand Inquisitor occurred. The woman secretly returned to the Jedi library for a valuable artifact containing a list of Force-sensitive children, which would allow her to revive the Jedi Order. Finding the necessary item, she was already leaving the library hall when she saw the Grand Inquisitor, who she believed was carelessly handling her books and couldn't pass by. In your hands, not just an item capable of reviving the Jedi Order, but also one capable of destroying any hope for its revival if it falls into the hands of the Empire. You simply need to be cautious, not appear anywhere, and instead you attack an unfamiliar subject just because he carelessly tossed a book aside. What is this if not a manifestation of pride on Jocasta Nu's part, an irresponsible behavior putting at risk the fates of innocent Force users? But even that is not the end. Falling into Vader's clutches, Jocasta, in the presence of clone witnesses, calls him by his real name, resulting in the immediate elimination of these witnesses by the Sith. Again, what was the point of this? The last hope is that the clones, realizing that in front of them is a Jedi, will execute Order 66, though even in this case Jocasta will be next. Or another manifestation of pride such as, "Look how foolish you clones are, not even understanding whom you serve, while I figured out who hides under Vader's mask." And again, none of this would have happened if Jocasta had simply quietly left the Jedi Temple library. Incidentally, I also noticed one subtle detail. Yes, as you have already understood, the portrait of Jocasta Nu in this comic also reflects Jedi pride and self-assurance. But unlike the previous 3 Jedi in the case of the Archivist, this has direct roots in the prequels. Recall the scene from Episode 2 when Obi-Wan Kenobi was searching for the planet Kamino on the Jedi Library's archive maps and couldn't find it despite all evidence pointing to its presence in that sector. How did Jocasta respond to Kenobi's arguments? If something is not in the library, then it does not exist at all. What is this if not a sign of self-assurance? The archivist did not even entertain the thought that an outsider could have meddled in the archive entrusted to her and erased data about an entire planet. And she did not relent, even in the face of convincing arguments. So what do these proud and self-assured portraits of all the Jedi presented in the comic ultimately give us? At the very least, it reflects the author's attitude towards these heroes. Even after the Purge and the total collapse of not just the Jedi Order itself, but also its ideology, the surviving members of this sect still could not look within and analyze their own mistakes, making them once again. Only do not think that I side with Emperor Palpatine, who decided to physically destroy the Jedi Order. He clearly did not do this due to the false ideals of those same individuals, but because of his own quest for power. Well, the ideologically shaken order was merely a competitor on the path to galactic domination. The problem with the comic is different, in my opinion. It exposes the dark sides of the righteous Jedi and shows that in their current state, for ordinary people, Jedi guardianship is no different from Sith rule, as in both cases innocent or uninvolved victims perish. The galaxy needs a new ideal, and though the comic does not demonstrate it for understandable reasons, it clearly indicates that the galaxy needs change. And the time of the Jedi in the form they were presented at the end of Republican rule has passed. And let's call them old-fashioned Jedi, they are not the ones to set the course for the winds of change. An additional nuance to the Jedi images is drawn by the phrase of the Grand Inquisitor, who says that he never felt an affinity for Jedi teachings because he was taken into the Order as a child and was shown nothing but the light side, and Jocasta Nu, among other things, also restricted his thirst for knowledge. And here again is yet another exposure of the important problem of the Jedi Order, the separation of children from their families. What remains in the soul of a child after such an experience? How can he walk the righteous path if he initially believes that he was wronged? So since we touched upon the image of the Grand Inquisitor, let's also mention other Inquisitors. The comic does not pay them as much attention as the 4 previously noted Jedi, but nevertheless, I observed a few interesting details. As I already said, the same Grand Inquisitor was engaged in studying archives and libraries, feeding on knowledge. But another plot line involving the Inquisitors is also intriguing. At a certain point in the comic's action, a red-skinned female Inquisitor releases Heathcliff's wife and child, but as soon as the fifth brother witnesses the scene, the Inquisitor immediately uses the Force to snatch the child from the mother's arms, presenting it to her fellow Inquisitors as if she had intended to give hope, and then take it away from the beginning. The comic does not reveal the true motives of the red-skinned girl, but what if she lied to the Inquisitors, and her real intentions were indeed to release the innocent victims? This raises the question of whether the Inquisitors have entirely forgotten the correct Jedi ideals, if perhaps one of them is capable of compassion. The subsequent development of this scene is no less interesting. After the mission to find Heathcliff, Darth Vader attacks this red-skinned woman, and when her friend among the Inquisitors stands up for her, Vader attacks him too, presenting it all as punishment for showing compassion. The red-skinned woman towards Heathcliff's wife and child, and the Twi'lek towards this woman. And everything seems fine, but in my opinion, Vader had a hidden motive in the form of a personal vendetta. And here is the evidence. Earlier, Vader had already committed a similar murder within the reviewed comic. In one of the scenes, Coruscant Guard clones opened fire on Darth Vader, mistakenly taking him for a Jedi. Since the Sith himself had not yet been introduced to the public as the Emperor's right hand, this mistake is quite understandable. However, Commander Fox was aware of who Vader was and did not provide his subordinate clone troopers with a description of the Sith. The result was a broken neck for Commander Fox. It seems clear, severe punishment for the clones' incompetence. But remember the scene from the 5th season of the Clone Wars where Commander Fox did not let Anakin Skywalker into the prison cell of his Padawan close friend Ahsoka Tano. Skywalker's facial expression expresses, to put it mildly, some disagreement with the clone's actions. And here Anakin, under the guise of Darth Vader, breaks Fox's neck ostensibly for his incompetence, or under the pretense of his incompetence, with the true reason being personal revenge, a motive so inherent to the Sith. But what could have been the personal motive in the case of the execution of the two Inquisitors? The scene of their dialogue unequivocally hints that there is some sympathy, and perhaps even closeness between them. The possibility for these beings to openly express their emotions and potentially be together is something that Vader himself was deprived of in his past life in his relationship with Padme. So I think the fierce envy of others' feelings was the Sith's hidden motive for deciding to deal with the sweet pair of Inquisitors. Indeed, Padme Amidala, or rather the memories of her, is the central theme of the entire comic, though not particularly obvious. What follows is exclusively my personal interpretation of certain scenes scattered throughout the comic, leading the main character to the final scene. I denote my own interpretation of these scenes, as their interpretation may vary depending on the cultural background of the reader. Moreover, the same scene can be interpreted in several ways. And to facilitate the perception of the further material, I will proceed as follows. First, I will show a video sequence with key scenes of the comic, in my opinion, merely commenting on what is happening so that you, as viewers, will remember precisely what I am reviewing. Then I will replay the video sequence with the same scenes, offering my own interpretation of what happened and the overall meaning of the entire comic. Agreed? Let's go. So these scenes, as you might guess, are associated with the Force and represent a visual depiction of Darth Vader's meditation. In the first meditation scene, we see Anakin Skywalker meditating in some mental place over black waters where lightning strikes from crimson clouds. Blue butterflies flutter around him. Part of the substance that makes up Skywalker's mental body, Anakin, like a tentacle, reaches out to one of the butterflies, but he is interrupted by a servant, and Vader exits meditation. We see that at this moment he is holding an ignited lightsaber in front of him with the Force. The next scene of Vader's immersion in meditation, using the language of the comic, presents to us how the Force works, with which the Sith is currently calculating the traitor of the Empire who attempted his life. Skywalker is in the same mental place with dark waters, and blue butterflies are also flying around him. In the frame to the right, a blurry image first appears, which becomes clearer with each page of the comic, like Polaroid photographs developing, until finally a clear image of the traitor is displayed. I really love it when a piece of art uses its expressive means to the fullest. In this sense, this meditation scene with the gradual drawing of the traitor is probably the most vivid in the comic and certainly my favorite. Moreover, it portrays Vader precisely as a Force user, as he doesn't need to gather information and conduct investigations to find out who attempted his life. It is enough for him to summon the Force. In short, an amazing scene. Let's move on. After the Sith executed the traitor, he returned to meditation. This time the image of his mental world has somewhat changed. The clouds moved aside, the black water began to reflect the crimson-red sky, and blue butterflies began to flock to Skywalker. At this moment, the glass opposite the meditating Vader cracked and a fracture spread across the window. In the fourth meditation scene, the Sith recalls his last duel with Obi-Wan. Only in his mind he represents himself not as Skywalker, but as Darth Vader. In this altered memory, Vader defeats Kenobi, who falls into the lava stream and burns in the fire, uttering the same phrases as in Episode 3. In the next meditation session, it's the same mental place, but without butterflies. At that moment, it is unclear what exactly Vader is doing, as the page features several images of Vader in different locations. Perhaps these are his memories during meditation. In the next vision scene, taking place on the same starship on which young Anakin left Tatooine, Vader sees himself within the time frame of Episode 1. However, the face of young Skywalker has taken on the outline of Darth Vader's mask. Notably, Vader orders this ship to be landed on Mustafar, without activating the shields, causing the metallic hull of the ship to become significantly damaged due to exposure. This, of course, mirrors what happened to Vader himself on this planet after his skin was exposed to flames. In the final similar scene, Darth Vader opens a portal in his castle on Mustafar, with the words, "My destiny is in my hands," after which he goes through this portal. It is only the mental projection of Skywalker from previous visions that passes through, while Vader's body remains lying at the entrance to the portal. Before Anakin stretches a desert, where his beloved Padme awaits him. On his way, Anakin encounters his pregnant mother, behind whom appears the image of Emperor Palpatine casting some spell over her belly. Next, we are shown young Anakin on Tatooine, whose shadow holds the silhouette of Darth Vader, which breaks free from the shadow and reaches out to the boy. And then Anakin wakes up from this nightmare, and his mother comforts the child. Further, the mental projection of young Anakin continues his journey, and alongside him on Tatooine, his memories of pod racing, constructing C-3PO, and seeing Padme for the first time burst forth. Following this, as he walks towards the castle, the mental projection of Anakin grows older. All this is accompanied by respective memories of his first meeting with Palpatine, his time as a Padawan under Yoda's training, going with Padme to the Geonosis arena, and his marriage to his beloved. Next, a vision related to his Padawan Ahsoka Tano flashes before him, both from the past, where he is still her master, and the future, where they fight in the Sith Temple on Malachor. Following this, the castle Anakin was heading towards suddenly transforms into the Jedi Temple, and at its threshold he is met by familiar members of the Order with whom Anakin engages in combat, defeating every one of them. After this, Anakin finally enters the temple, where he meets Sheev Palpatine and Obi-Wan Kenobi, both of whom say, "I am your father," and begin fighting each other. The victorious combatant is Palpatine, but Anakin's projection incinerates him with red lightning and moves further. Finally, the hero exits onto the balcony, where he meets Padme. The mental projection assumes the form of Anakin Skywalker, who asks Amidala to go with him, but Padme transforms, her face acquiring demonic features, and she falls from the balcony, dying from a strike of red lightning. The image of Anakin once again changes into the portrayal of his mental projection, which screams, "No!" Then, from a distant balcony, a bright pillar of blue light shines, from which a person emerges and activates a lightsaber. The stream of blue light literally sweeps away Anakin's mental projection, and at this moment Darth Vader comes out of his trance. In the subsequent dialogue with the Emperor, Sirius asks his apprentice if he has found the true Mustafarian, to which Vader responds, "Yes." That, in essence, is all. This is the last vision of the comic. As I see it, they all collectively refer to Anakin's deceased wife. Why do I think this is connected to the figure of Padme? Well, first of all, simply because the comic itself starts with a conversation about her. and visualizations of Vader's memories of his spouse. For Vader, Padme's death happened out of his sight, and hence the news of it was a shock to the Sith, since everything he had done by turning to the dark side of the Force was to avoid precisely that. The news turns Vader's inner world upside down, but the realization does not come to him immediately. And here, secondly, I transition to analyzing the just-shown scenes of the comic. Let's compare how I understood them and how you understood them. The place where Darth Vader immerses himself during meditations is the Sith's inner world, at the center of which is his soul. Well, not quite his, but that of Anakin Skywalker, depicted symbolically. The depiction of the body correlates with the wounds Skywalker received in the battle with Kenobi, and the white parts of the body signify the missing limbs. Why do I consider this projection the soul of Skywalker and not of Vader? I will explain that a bit later. Accordingly, the entire surrounding setting represents an inner hell for Skywalker. This hell is connected not only with Vader's physical suffering, but also with his emotional turmoil. Anakin is unable to comprehend Padme's death, and in my view, the presence of his soul in this hellish place is precisely because of his beloved. The most crucial part of this vision is the blue butterflies to which Anakin's essence reaches out. I think it is obvious to everyone that these butterflies are symbolic, not physical, so it is worth pondering what butterflies might symbolize in general. In Asian mythology, butterflies are considered the souls of the deceased, and I am inclined to this interpretation because, firstly, Star Wars often looks towards Asia for inspirations, and secondly, Anakin's mental projection is in the lotus pose in which Buddha meditated, creating a Buddhist Asian atmosphere in this scene. Thus, these butterflies are a kind of soul of Padme or Anakin's memories of her. In his hellish inner world, these butterflies are the only bright spots, to one of which Skywalker reaches out, trying to understand who this guest is. At this stage, Vader does not yet realize that these are memories of Padme. It is simply a focus in his dark, pain-ridden consciousness. He reaches for a butterfly to examine and understand it, but his meditation, let me remind you, is interrupted. And here we see a lightsaber hovering in front of Vader. This is done precisely to enhance the contrast between Vader in this world and Anakin in the mental one. This lightsaber, according to my conclusions, is a symbol of death of a once luminous Jedi. And in this drawing it serves to remind us that in his dark guise Skywalker is dead, while his soul is tormented in the inner hell of the Sith. The scene with the detection of the Imperial traitor hardly affects the overall concept of the comic, and is needed rather to use the language of the comic, that is, the language of pictures and short phrases, to show how a Force user utilizes the Force. However, the subsequent meditation after the traitor's execution already has the meaning I was seeking, as I previously noted, the clouds above Anakin's mental projection part. In my opinion, this is caused by Vader's satisfaction with the execution of the traitor. Yes, it is an evil act, but such things bring a Sith into a calm state, which is precisely depicted in the drawing. And now, in this state of calm, Anakin finally touches the blue butterflies, and look what happens. The glass before Darth Vader cracks, which signifies a disturbance in the Force caused by Anakin's soul touching these butterflies. This scene refers us to the previous Vader comic line by Marvel, where the Star Destroyer's glass also cracks from Darth Vader's Force disturbance at the moment he learns he has a son. Since that comic came out earlier than the one being reviewed, it further supports the argument that the blue butterflies represent memories of Padme. Vader came into contact with a fragment of a close person, and it stirred him just as the news about his son did. Also, while writing the script for this video, I had another association related to butterflies. The fact is that significant attention is paid to Darth Vader's armor in the comic. Essentially, according to the comic's meaning and the image of Vader from the original trilogy, the armor is the essence of Vader himself as a Sith, a grim and cold entity in which it is difficult to discern a human being. The comic in turn places great emphasis on Skywalker's inner world, where in a dark, diabolical place beautiful blue butterflies suddenly flutter about. Well, these images together reminded me of the story of Jean-Dominique Bauby, who at 44 suffered a stroke and ended up in a state of waking coma, where almost the entire body of the patient is paralyzed, yet the person is conscious. In Jean-Dominique's case, the only unparalyzed part of his body was his left eye, with which the editor wrote an entire book. Every day, for 3 hours, his assistant recited the alphabet, and he blinked when she read out the needed letter. That's how Bobby's autobiography was born, about a man trapped inside his body, which the author compared to a diving bell, inside which his soul fluttered like a butterfly. The book is called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Well, I think the analogy is clear. The butterfly memories of Skywalker, along with his soul, are also trapped in the cold, metallic suit of Darth Vader. By the way, Charles Soule can, in a sense, be considered the originator of the artistic device related to depicting blue butterflies in Star Wars. At the same time, they appeared in the cartoon Rollout, where Ben Solo played with them, as well as in the second season of The Mandalorian, where butterflies appeared before a meditation scene with Baby Grogu. But we will talk about that some other time. In that meditation scene, where Vader reconstructs in his mind the memories of the duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi, it signifies a certain deliberate or unintended mind game. Thus, Vader tries to substitute the memory of his past life with false memories, as if he had always been Darth Vader. Essentially, this is the displacement of one personality by another. A similar scene was also present in the aforementioned Darth Vader comic of 2015. Chronologically, the events of that comic occur after the events being reviewed, so one can conclude that over these years of mental training, Vader was still unable to displace Anakin Skywalker from his consciousness. This meditation session, as I already mentioned, is the most difficult for me to understand. The absence of butterflies in this scene, as I see it, suggests that these butterfly memories have merged with Anakin's soul. Look closely at the drawings of one of the previous meditation scenes. In one of them, the outlines of the butterflies are distinctly visible, and in the next they lose their form as if penetrating Skywalker's soul. Thus, I interpret their absence in this meditation scene as a certain realization that the memories of Padme are part of Anakin's soul. The meaning of the other paintings on this page is unclear to me. Write your guesses in the comments. The vision scene in which the Sith sees the features of his mask emerging on the face of his younger self is a consequence of inner work in his consciousness to replace memories and personality. And now we've reached the main scene of the comic, the astral journey of Anakin's soul. I emphasize once again precisely Anakin, not Vader, because through the portal to the astral world, Skywalker's soul infiltrates, while Vader's body remains lying in the material world. Next we see the beaten path to the castle where his beloved Padme awaits him, and this path reflects his life journey, which begins with the pregnancy of his mother, Shmi Skywalker. An unknown voice announces that Anakin had no father because he is the chosen one. This is a kind of hint at an immaculate conception. However, then some sort of energy projection or vision of the dark side of the Force shows Palpatine casting spells over the protruding belly of a woman. At the time when the comic first came out, many were hyping over this drawing, saying that the mystery of Anakin's parentage has finally been revealed. Well, firstly, I highly doubt that such a mystery would be revealed in a comic book rather than in a film, with all due respect to this remarkable comic. Firstly, even in this illustration, it is evident that Shmi is already significantly pregnant, so Palpatine could not possibly be Anakin's biological father, although it is likely that he somehow influenced the midichlorians of the fetus. But in this case, I am puzzled by the fact that Sidious is depicted as already mutilated. Yet at the time of Shmi Skywalker's pregnancy, Palpatine was a middle-aged politician with an unscarred face. A little later, I will try to provide another interpretation of this scene. Then, through the fire, Anakin's childhood memories manifest. Perhaps this is the author's way of showing that Vader is unable to block the personality of Skywalker. Next, we see the depiction of Anakin's path from youngling to Padawan, which are scenes familiar to us from Episode 2. Then we see how the astral projection shows Anakin's soul, not only his past, but also his future. In both cases, Ahsoka Tano is at the center of attention. However, since the comic does not focus on the figure of Skywalker's apprentice, these drawings are rather for show and ambiance, so I will not analyze them. In the next illustration, we see the transformation of the dark place, where Skywalker's soul was headed into a Jedi temple, in front of which the Jedi themselves are standing. The temple is drawn as if it is an illusion, and as I see it, overall, the concept hints that Jedi training on Anakin's path to his goal with Padme was merely an obstacle, creating illusions of something that is actually false. In fact, I've previously dissected the author of the comic's attitude towards the Jedi, and this illustration only emphasizes it. Next, Anakin deals with the Jedi standing in his way. This is further testimony that the Jedi teachings only hindered Anakin in his true desire to be alongside Padme. In the depictions of Anakin's massacre of the Jedi, there is the familiar phrase, "Let the past die. Kill it if you have to." This is a quote from Kylo Ren from Episode 8, who urged Rey to cast off the anchors of her past and live in the present. For Skywalker, this phrase is also fitting, since all his internal struggle with his own memories and passing through this astral path indicates that his past cannot let him go. Understandably so, the wounds in Anakin's soul from everything that happened to him are too deep. Thus, the illusion of the temple vanishes, and Anakin finds himself inside the dark castle, where he encounters the figures of Kenobi and Palpatine. Immediately followed by the title, "I am your father," and then Obi-Wan and Sidious begin to fight. I have two interpretations for this scene. The first is obvious. Both Kenobi and Palpatine substituted the father figure for Anakin, as both were his mentors and the only male examples in his life. Accordingly, both fought for his soul, which is reflected in their duel in these illustrations. As a result of the struggle, Palpatine triumphed, and we see him exactly in the same guise as in Episode 3 during the scene of Anakin's induction into the Sith. The second interpretation is less obvious. The phrase, "I am your father," is spoken by the Force itself, its dark side, addressing Anakin and confirming the fact of Skywalker's chosen status. He was created by the Force itself. And this possibly refers us to the previous illustration of the pregnant Shmi Skywalker, where Palpatine acts as a sort of father of the Force to Anakin. One way or another, Anakin incinerates Palpatine, since he, just like the Jedi, was actually only an obstacle to Skywalker on his path to Padme. On the balcony, he meets his wife. The overall setting hints at Anakin's romantic memory when he and Padme were talking on the balcony of the castle on Naboo and kissed for the first time. Remember, there were also flower pots in that scene. Indeed, Anakin's soul itself at this moment transforms into his image of a young Jedi. However, note Amidala's blue dress and the flowers in her hair. It was in that form that Padme was buried, which is not only a strong visual image in the case of the comic, but also a meaningful one. This whole journey of Anakin was paved towards the death of his beloved. At the point where Skywalker's soul has arrived in the astral world, he encounters exactly what happened in reality. In some sense, this means that it is difficult for Vader to realize Padme's death, as all his actions were precisely aimed at preventing it. And here, in the astral world, Padme dies again. More precisely, given her funerary image, she is already dead. As I mentioned earlier, the image of Padme, or rather, the bright memory of her, is the butterflies that circle in the Sith's consciousness. Here, Padme transforms, her eyes flash like a Sith's, and she herself says that Anakin Skywalker is dead. I believe this is an image of the dark side, sent to Anakin in order to finally kill any hope in Vader for something bright, which will ultimately bring Anakin's soul only pain, and hence bind him even more strongly to the dark side. And before the final scene of Anakin's astral journey, I will return to the theme of butterflies. We examined that butterflies in Eastern culture symbolize the souls of the deceased, but they can also be seen in another context, a Christian one. Why exactly that? Well, simply because Anakin's image as the chosen one, born as a result of an immaculate conception, is close to the image of Jesus Christ. And in Christianity, the developmental stages of this insect, the caterpillar, the pupa, and finally the butterfly, symbolize life, death, and resurrection, which is why the butterfly is sometimes depicted in the hand of Christ, symbolizing the rebirth and resurrection of the soul. In my view, the only way of rebirth in the material world after physical death is through the leaving of offspring, in which a genetic fragment of the parents will always be present. In this sense, I interpret the symbol of the immortal soul as constantly reproducing offspring. The bearer of life dies, but life itself is immortal. In general, in this context, the butterflies in Vader's consciousness symbolize not only the memories and soul of Padme, but also what Padme reincarnated into after her death, which, in my interpretation, are her children. That is, in some way, the Force itself, or the manifestation of Amidala through the Force, is guiding Anakin's wounded soul, hinting that somewhere his child is alive. This, by the way, adds another meaning to the scene with the cracked glass. Perhaps at that moment Vader realized that he had a child. As I mentioned earlier, exactly the same reaction in another comic about the Sith was triggered in him by the guaranteed news that he had a son, and another argument about the butterflies. In ancient Mexico, they were a symbol of a woman who died in childbirth, which indeed aligns perfectly with Padme. Returning to the comic. So the fallen Padme from the balcony in my version is not the soul of Padme herself, but a manifestation of the dark side of the Force, pushing Anakin onto the path of acknowledging his unceasing pain from the loss of a loved one. But where is that part of Padme that previously manifested in the form of blue butterflies? Anakin sees a pillar of blue light on the horizon passing through a spot where there are no storm clouds. And this is simultaneously a symbol of Padme's reincarnation, a symbol of new hope, and a symbol of the salvation of Skywalker's soul, for a human figure emerges from the light and ignites a lightsaber with a blue glow. I think it's clear to everyone without explanations that this is Luke Skywalker, the son of Anakin and Padme, the person who will save his father. The saber in his hands, as we remember from the movies, belonged to Anakin himself, and in my interpretation from this analysis it signifies the life of a Jedi, which metaphorically means that it is Luke Skywalker who will bring his father back to life, a fate we know will occur in the finale of Episode 6. Recall that at the start of his astral journey, Anakin's soul was moving toward the Black Castle along a clearly defined path. Here it is, the path that Anakin traversed, laden with the death of his beloved. But when he looks past the Black Castle towards the blue pillar of light, he sees the continuation of the road, meaning that Anakin's life journey is not yet over, despite the monstrous tragedy. Regrettably, this path is strewn with dead bodies, but regardless, it is a path towards the light, a path of salvation. After this, Skywalker's soul transforms into Vader's body, and sometime later the Sith contacts Palpatine, who inquires if his apprentice has found the truth he sought. And Vader replies, "Yes." The truth for him is the understanding that there is still hope in his life, and concluding the topic of butterflies, their life cycle epitomizes the entire life of Anakin Skywalker. Life, death, entrapment in a black metallic cocoon, rebirth, and subsequent immortality. Thus, such a powerful piece has been added to my collection. Beyond everything I have told you, the comic contains plenty of fan service, the appearance of already familiar characters, interesting dialogues, especially between Palpatine and his apprentice, as well as an abundance of engaging plots, such as Tarkin and a gang of bounty hunters hunting down Vader himself. In essence, I've hardly touched on even half of what this remarkable comic encompasses, but I have highlighted what I consider to be the most important for reading. Oh yes, lovers of brutal scenes will be satisfied. Despite the format and the overall teenage orientation of Star Wars, the comic is filled with scenes of violent action, though without crossing the line.